Good morning if you're in Australia, good evening if you're in the US, and good whatever if you're somewhere else. My name is Susan Hawthorne, and I'm really delighted to be having a launch of Robyn Morgan's Harvesting Darkness, new poems 2019 to 2023. So I'm just beginning with an acknowledgement of land. We respectfully acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their custodianship of the lands and waterways. The countries on which Spinifex offices are situated are Jiru, Bunurong and Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung, Gundungurra and Noongar. We also acknowledge the many women throughout history who have fought for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their lives. So I could spend the next hour introducing Robyn Morgan because she's been involved in the women's liberation movement for such a long time. Her name was one of the first feminist names I encountered with the Australian pirated edition of Monster, which I think was published in 1972. I carried it around with me for months in 1973, which was when I joined the women's movement. Her name appeared in Ms. magazine, and every time a new book came out or a new collection of poems, I ran out to buy it. Among my favourites are Sisterhood is Powerful, the very first feminist anthology I read cover to cover. I should say. In non-fiction, among my favourites are Going Too Far, The Anatomy of Freedom and The Demon Lover. In poetry, Lady of the Beast, Depth Perception, and her first Spinifex book, Dark Matter, which we'll also refer to today. Her novel Parallax is also a favourite, another Spinifex title. Prizes, well, she's received a US endowment for the Arts Prize in Poetry, and her books have been widely translated. And now with Harvesting Darkness, we can immerse ourselves in her latest work. So I'll now introduce both Robyn Rowland and Patricia Sykes. So the other Robyn, we could spend another hour on her as well. Between them, I think they've written something like 45 books. So Robyn Rowland AO is an Irish-Australian citizen who also spends a lot of time in Turkey. 3 of her books are available from Spinifex: Perverse Serenity, This Intimate War Gallipoli, Çanakkale, 1915, as well as her non-fiction book Living Laboratories, which arose from her active involvement in critiquing reproductive technologies. She was Professor of Social Inquiry and Women's Studies at the University until 1996. She's been involved in many organisations, including FinRage, the Feminist International Network of Reproductive and Resistance to Reproductive and Genetic Engineering. And from 2007 to 2009, she was the inaugural Deputy Chair of the Board of the Australian Poetry Centre. And from 2010 to 2013, she was on the National Advisory Council for Australian Poetry. And I remember the last few years, it's been really hard to know where Robyn would be, although she did spend a lot of time on the south coast of New South Wales with her father, who lived a very long time, over 100. We're also extremely lucky to have Patricia Sykes here, who's another fine poet, and she reviewed Dark Matter when it came out. She will speak after Robyn Rowland. She's won a stack of prizes, written 3 poetry collections: Maya Dancing, Mother Warrior Homegrounds, and the Abbotsford Mystery, as well as libretti, which have been reviewed internationally. She was a member of the Women's Circus, where she walked tight wire, which is great preparation for poetry, I think. So between all these women, we have the most amazing feminist activism, scholarship, political theory, artistic practice of all kinds. And they they all exemplify that. So I'm going to pass now to Robyn Rowland.
Thank you, Susan, for that very generous introduction. And it is wonderful to meet you, Robyn. Apparently, I'm told we met some years ago in Melbourne. I bet you don't remember, because my memory's not that great anymore.
I don't remember.
I don't remember it either. So, it was wonderful. It was wonderful.
Yes. Brilliant. Absolutely.
So here we are again, launching a truly wonderful book. A book with vitality, with poetic skill at its finest. And what can I say but that you chose your publisher wisely, Robyn, an excellent feminist press of over 32 years standing, in the committed hands of Susan Hawthorne and Renata Klein, both well-known authors in their own right. Good mutual choice. It's a terrifying honour to be able to launch this book. I'm proud to say we are in a book together, but it's a long time ago. It's Radically Speaking. It's one. Feminism Reclaimed, that Spinifex brought out in 1996, and we have a poem bookending that. Yours is Monster, and mine is about the desecration of Sylvia Plath's grave in Hempton Bridge. A very fine task.
Yours of mine too, yes.
Of course, I wasn't there. And the truth is, I really don't want to launch this book. I would prefer to have been allowed to just read the poems one after another and after another, because keep reading and you keep unveiling and delving in, because the movement is far from linear. The movement is helix, a symbol of resilience, nautilus, convex, concave, whirling between space and the interior of the body, back and forth between hope and achievement, with yet a fear of failure to change the world as much as we wanted to, as much as was necessary. Now, see how I wrote we, because this book and its companion, Dark Matter, published by Spinifex in 2018, drew me into convergence with Robyn the activist, the poet, and the older woman, because sisterhood is global, is our fall net, our buoyancy, our connection. When Robyn writes in the first poem, these hands, an old woman's hands, whoa, still strong but with loosening grip, bones delicate, gloved in blue embroideries, prominent veins, skin spotted brown as a hen's egg. They are my hands also, because so much of these poems, as great poems do, recall ourselves back to ourselves in a deep way. When you write in The Will to Your Son of poems, quote, as my real divestiture, and of him in This Dark Hour, when blood of my blood, bone of my bone, child grown to manhood now, stranger, intimate, not too distant, but apart, lies safe. I too breathe that love towards my own sons. In your TED reading in 2015, you said you fell in love with poetry at 3 years of age, with poetry's, and I quote, rhythms, music, metaphor, imagery. Quote again, poetry being the essence of communication, the discipline, the distillation. And that's the way you said it. All this is achieved in your own work. And so we get, quote, time intimate as an embalmer, and the garnet taste of plum. Beautiful. But I cheat here. That poem is from Robyn's earlier book with Spinifex in 2018, Dark Matter. But how can I launch the one without the other companion, striding beside? These books are woven into each other. Similarities in political happenings as Robyn reaches into horror and gives us Kiglai 1994 in her earlier book, about the murders of 750 patients in a mental facility in Rwanda by Hutu militiamen. And in 2023, the massacre of an Indigenous tribe along the Amazon. So much cruelty still alive in the world. From these earthen terrors to the wonders of science and the body, the entering in both books into the visceral, so that the brain and its dark matter are investigated deeply, the metaphor flinging towards space. And we look at the names of these books and their sections. In dark matter, doing the blood work. The new old woman, grey matter, and finally dark matter. In harvesting darkness, reaping, threshing, winnowing. Tough, active words, fearless words, signifying strength, valour. Science tells us dark matter's exact identity remains a mystery in space, and that the dark energy of the brain is a concept that's recently been making its way into the scientific field between the dark energy of the universe and the way in which the brain processes occur. And Robyn uses these images to enter her own Parkinson's, investigating it poetically. Darkness, dark matter, death, space, the brain. How well she has chosen this continuing movement. My grandmother had Parkinson's, and I helped to care for her with my mother until she was 68, but minimally in the ways of a then 16-year-old. Her part was nothing like this. I would never have comprehended that this ailment could inform a poetry so powerful, so alive, so observant and penetrating. Nor that the poems on it in dark matter could contain also lines of humour. Quote, who needs to walk in a straight line anyway? And quote, balance has never been my strong point. But the poignancy of increasing loss is strong. When you grieve, quote, when you grieve for yourself, not pity, you understand, but mourning. It's not for old times and missed boats. There's one reason only. You find you've lost stillness. And yet in the garden before dawn in this dark hour, quote, there is the small, still hour of immeasurable lightness and the breeze of gratitude. And through the poems, a balancing, a weighing of light and dark. Like other poets, I share with Robyn the deep ambiguity of witness in poetry versus action in reality. And always we fear failure in both. But I think Carolyn Forche in her anthology Against Forgetting would say bearing witness through poetry is resistance. And through bearing witness, whether it be personal or political, and we know they are the same, change does come. It happens and continues to happen. As you said, Robyn, in an interview in 2000, even 15 years ago, phrases like family violence and sexual harassment didn't exist. There was no name for date rape. The triumphs seem ephemeral because they get absorbed into the fabric so fast. One of the most important things, you said, is to stop and claim the good things. History needs it. Kids need it. We need it. At times there's a harshness in poems too, as in Taxidermists, Regret, The Fish, where failure lurks as if we haven't learned the lesson of the value of that flaw in the rug, the nature of being human, not superhuman women who get every little thing right. We have to go a bit easy on ourselves, sisters. What has the poet learned which she shares in these books? Old loves never lose their impact. Youth was truly vital with its hectic busyness. Old age truly wise. Poetry solves little but salves all. The world continues both hideous and loving. Death and slowly growing into physical loss can awaken us to a precision of honesty, a truly beautiful gift of insight. As well as our agenda for political change, justice and equality, feminism is important to us because of its deep connectivity, its humanity, its moral intelligence, as opposed to prescriptive moralism, as Dworkin put it. Poetry is the way into our deeper selves. Its power resides in its ability to connect, to make us think, feel, change, and experience at some levels a sense of awe. It can make us tremble. It can make us brave. And these are poems of valour. These are books of a unique kind. In powerful poetry, the poet's humanity is naked. Her woundings have brought to us these pearls, as she says in her poem Pearls, as the oyster creates its own in the poem Pearls, from winding itself around its gritty wound on towards, quote, satin iridescent art. I want to just, if I might, finish. I got carried away there and I didn't read the poem I was going to read to you on the way through. So, if you don't mind, I will read you The Ringmaster's Desertion, which came into my speech where I was talking about the Parkinson's experience. But this poem is one of my favourites because it feeds off William Butler Yeats's The Circus Animal's Desertion. And he wrote some good man poems about ageing. My body gnarls around me now as I excrete myself, calcifying to an exoskeleton, a womb, home, shell, trap, carapace, sanctuary, chrysalis, coffin. Why the drive then to send these messages? Does the snail long to be seen for itself? Does the crustacean rattle, I am alive inside here? A rag is ripped from some larger cloth. A bone is a fragment of a scaffold. A heart is just a muscle, but my muscles have minds of their own. I must hunch to gain perspective. Only then, stooping high, dare I recognise a creature arrayed in rag and bone who scuttles across this intersection as the light turns red, weaving while laughing at the pain, through the gridlocked traffic in my brain. I have to say, Robyn, I cannot see any evidence of the gridlock, but you know, that may be your feeling of it. Boy, these poems are not telling me that. And finally, I think just to read, before we finish, this absolutely beautiful poem, Certain Evenings. It's such a gift, really. We sat in the darkening garden lit by candle flame and fireflies. The round wood table drew us in. We weren't wealthy, but we were content. We ate seafood, roast vegetables, salad crisp with herbs from the garden, mint, basil, sorrel. We drank, we laughed. We talked of poetry, films, music, politics. The birds chanted vespers. We were three people alive in a time of planetary grief. Three artists trying to live clearly and die well. You really can't ask more than that, or less. If someday in a future unimagined you sit in a garden at such an hour, perhaps you might remember us, who went before, who found some way, sometime, somehow not to despair, some means to make things beautiful and to make beautiful things. We pass this way. Thank you. It's a beautiful poem, and I really feel quite emotional. I am so pleased to declare this brilliant book, Harvesting Darkness, well and truly launched, and encourage you to buy both books from Spinifex to enrichen your life and your storage of understanding poetry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robyn. Now I'm going to pass to Patricia Sykes, who's also going to say some words of wisdom about Robyn Rowland's book. Trish and I met in a circus, but you know, that's history. Over to you, Trish.
Thanks, Susan. And I must say I'm delighted that this is being recorded, because there is so much food for thought in that lovely launch speech. It's a pleasure to be with you face to face in time, Robyn. One of the things that struck me most about your newest poetic foray into darkness is how, as always, you do not flinch. You do not turn aside from anything. And I'm reminded again of Yeats's view, which I mentioned in my review of Dark Matter, that poetry arises from the quarrel with ourselves. The irony about living into old age, of course, is that there's plenty to argue with oneself about. And I very much enjoyed that self-argument all through these poems. The fluctuations between power and powerlessness, the confrontation with examples of injustice, the poignancy in acknowledging one's closer proximity to death, and do you give death a run for its money? The personal successes, the failures, these all strike a chord. And of course, this is by no means a comprehensive list. But it's your metaphor of the harvest that enriches the collection for me, because it takes me back into my childhood, to the memory of my father swinging the scythe to cut through the long grass in front of our very tiny farm cottage in Modawari, which is the subject of my second collection with Spinifex. I remember the rhythmic musical swish of the scythe as it cut through the grass and exposed the vulnerability of the life beneath the grass, in the same way that poetry can be merciless when it's exposing deep, dark matters. And then later, years later, in another country property at harvest time, watching the wheat being sliced through by this monstrous machine, and the magic of the bales coming out the back, the chaff dust floating in the sunlight, the rabbits scurrying out of the wheat to safety, the shock of seeing a snake baled in one of the bales of hay. And for days during the harvest, that was the rhythm of our lives. And of course, then there was the gleaning, the chaff, the leftover, the bits. It was, as a childhood experience, it was unforgettable to see the stubble afterwards, to see the ploughed earth before, that whole process of sowing, growing, reaping, harvesting, which brings me back to Harvesting Darkness, the hard poetic work of it, the graft. Poetry is scythe, if you like. You've certainly given the collection a damn good threshing. I thank you for the experience and the challenge of it, and I'll be winnowing through it for some time yet. Who'd have expected the villanelle to emerge as a bag lady, for goodness sake? Or icicles of brine annihilating the heart as they thaw. Where would a trilogy of darkness take you, I wonder, and us as your readers? Would it be another cracking open of the world egg, as you, cupped by tender claws, dream on of readiness? Thank you again. It's a beautiful collection.
Oh my God. Well, Patricia, Robyn, thank you from my heart. I mean, it has, I don't know who you're talking about, but it's a wonderful, wonderful tribute. It is it's just extra. I am now out of words, and you see how rare that is. But
Thank you.
But I'm very grateful to you both. I'm deeply grateful. When I first was diagnosed with Parkinson's, which is now 13 years ago, I decided that I wanted to see what I could make of the disease, not what the disease would make of me. And I've kept my word. I've kept that promise. I've been very fortunate and privileged. I've had good medical care. Obviously, I've had loving, close family and dear friends. So I can hardly think that I've done it alone. But there are parts of it that you have to do alone. I've had deep brain stimulation, so I no longer tremor. However, my balance is indeed, I am definitely not an Apollonian. I am a Dionysian, and I walk down the street as if I were drunk without having the fun of getting drunk. So there's that, and there was a bout with cancer, and there's all sorts of things that happen in the aging and wheel of life. And I was worried that this book was too dark. This went beyond, dark matter, and this was really too dark, and nobody would want to read it, or they'd think, "Oh my God, a whole book about aging and death, isn't that special?" And it took me a while to remember, first of all, just who my audience is, and their quality and their intelligence. And I better hustle to keep up with them. And also that after all, I mean, the inevitability of aging, if we're lucky, and certainly the inevitability of death, either way, is with us all the time. It just matters whether we acknowledge it or whether we try to hide from it. And acknowledging it and trying to find a way to understand it and enter it became the challenge. There also was discovered in that, for me at least, the tenacity of life and living. And I am going to read a few poems, if that's all right with you, but the first one in the book, which is These Hands, which was referred to briefly earlier, is a poem about that tenacity and about how no matter how dark you think the subject matter is, there is something in the human spirit that is different. I wouldn't say goes on or triumphs or anything so grandiose. Those are mostly men's terms. But it's persistent, and that's a woman's verb. So these hands, I study them by bedside lamplight. An old woman's hands, strong still, but with a loosening grip, bones delicate, gloved in blue embroideries, prominent veins. Skin spotted brown as a hen's egg, nails clean, unpolished, short for typing, fingers starting to stiffen, curving to curl toward claws. They twitch and tremor sometimes. Often they cramp, drop teaspoons, fumble keys. They've held a lot in their day, a newborn's featherweight and protest signs and bales of hay, stirred soup and rallies, played chess, tricks, fair, Bach, and for keeps. They've applauded, beckoned, shaken themselves as fists. They've clasped 1,000 other hands, made lists, caressed the flesh of lovers. They never presumed fingerprints were an identity, lifelines of fate, though they did long to hold the whole world in themselves, like the woman sang. Once graceful, these now gnarled hands knocked and knit, not wools, but stories, grim tales at times, a witch's hands. A child might fear such hands, though they still twist in grief for other hands that punch time clocks, pray to the void for mercy, pound gavels to muffle screams, pull triggers. I study how to teach these hands to let go. Let it all go, let go now. But they reach past me, grabbing pen and pad to scribble a message, words I will find all but illegible once these white-knuckle hours unclench to loose this past cold light's gold dawn. Hold fast, hold tight, hold on. Here is another one, and these are these are all when in my poems there are references to science or to the cosmos or to animals. Those are all accurate. Those are all true. Those are all from real life, as they say. So this is Pearls. She slept naked sometimes, wearing only pearls, stared in the mirror at her withered face and smiled, brushed silver hair grown back post-chemo as white curls, but noticed something in the eyes, obsessive, wild with pain as an oyster, frantic to wrap the wound gouged raw by sand grains, pour its tender flesh, internal bandage, self on self, winding round to layer smooth agony's sharp edge toward satin, iridescent art. A parrotfish chews reef, gnaws rock, searches for algae, digests this into fine white sand, crystals of which will madden the oyster once they are the oyster's guest. Some oysters escape harvesting and sink to the seabed, wound and all, where parrotfish seek their prey. But unworn pearls grow dim, needing warmth and oil to satisfy the itch, a skin to graze, a pulsing heart. She sleeps naked, wearing pearls to play her part. Now, there's a seamlessness, at least for me, between politics and writing. In many cultures, there's that same seamlessness in Chile, in the Arab world. In the United States, not so much. In the United States, it's you write poetry. What are you, crazy? So I love to violate that, and you're my people, wherever you are. So here is a a poem that's in 3 parts, and is political. But then again, what isn't? It has an epigraph from the New York Times. The epigraph reads, "Federal prosecutors in Brazil opened an investigation into a reported massacre of 10 members of an uncontacted indigenous tribe gathering eggs along the river in a remote part of the Amazon, where the tribe encountered gold miners. The miners bragged about the killings and about cutting up the bodies and throwing them in the river. Funding has been drastically cut for indigenous affairs, despite recent and continuing intrusions, which activists say amounts to genocide." New York Times, September 2017. 1. Back from the dead, here you are again. This time your reach exceeding your grasp. Trying your most, but not always your best. Blame the frequency. A low-level frequency you don't even notice till you stumble across it, when otherwise focused, renewing your license to practice poetry. And there it is, there it's been all along. Soft, subtle, stealthy, a never-off motor once you're awake, oscillating between 3 hertz and 7. Part of you always in shudder. And why not? Some other universe may permit stillness, but might cost you too high a price. Poetry. Here we shudder in terror when seeing the truth of ourselves, tremble awestruck at the beauty. Our disease, a propensity for metaphor that shakes us to the mortal core. 2. When tourists float the Amazon, what's left of native peoples sometimes stand small clusters between 3 and 7 on the banks. The women shout "Pishtaco," which means evil strangers who come to steal our oil. Translated, this strikes the tourists as a protest against mining for natural resources, which is true partly. Slashed and burnt jungle, agribusiness now. Feeds cattle, yields soy. Mining sends minerals to China. One tribe in Brazil, the Akunsu, has only 4 members left alive. Near them, the man of the hole, as anthropologists call him, lives in a hollow in the floor of the jungle, firing arrows if approached. He's the last of his tribe. It's accurate, then, what the tourists think, just not the way the tourists think it. The term Pishtaco comes from the 16th century, when Spanish conquistadores explored the Amazon and found, to their frustration, how humidity quickly flaked their muskets into rust. Inventive men, devoted to their Christ, they simply killed the natives, boiled the coppery bodies in iron pots, and used the rendered fat to grease their weapons. Pishtaco. 3. The frequency never ceases, but we adapt to it. We ignore it. Unnatural resources become normal. What practicing poetry spoils you for grasping, though, is how each of us in this dark universe has not wakened more frequently to just such a frequency. How we are each of us not in unceasing shudder at what we are. Not one seizure of grief after another, not convulsed with mourning, shivering from cold blood, oozing sluggish along rusted hearts, not cramped by sorrow, spastic with fear. Back from the dead again, here you are, trying your best. This universe, this terminal health some call metaphor, trembling with dread at the price of a poem. Dig while you can, I translate. Dig, dig deeper, then hide and wait. Wait, force yourself to survive. Fire poems when strangers approach you. You might be the last of your tribe.
Mm.
The last short poem I will read. Excuse me. I do apologize that I'm to the morning people that I'm drinking wine, but it is a book party, and
It is.
I hope you have coffee at least, This is the poem called Lace Makers, and
I
it's
love it.
dedicated to Suzanne Braun-Levine. It is based on a great painting which hangs in the Prado in Madrid, and was, of course, painted by Diego Velázquez, and is called Las Meninas, which is the ladies in waiting. It's a group portrait. The little Infanta, Princess of Spain, was dressed in lace for her portrait. Yet courtiers thought her not perfect enough, so added the dwarf to heighten her beauty. The painting is famous because of the dwarf. They also assumed it our duty for centuries to gladly go blind, tatting the edges of their nightcaps, cuffs, wedding hems, petticoats, kerchiefs, and veils, all without flaws, without even not one flaw. They never perceived our revenge, that the flaw had to be so exquisite, perfected, minute, unseen, and yet visible. It was safe from being detected. To this day, they don't see it. The flaw is the point. It's the necessity. It's everything. The work's lifeless without it. The bruise on the pear, the planet's wobble, the fungus, the mutation, the disobedience, the deliberate flaw in the Navajo blanket, to let the soul out. These poems, which are much more in strict form than I expected them to be, many are sonnets, one is a villanelle, etc., provided for me the scaffolding necessary to engage this subject matter. And I am deeply grateful that it resonated with you. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Robyn and Trish, do you want to just add a sentence or two while we're here?
How can you add a sentence?
I mean, I don't mean to limit yourself that way.
A sentence or two. I just want to say one thing, that the poem I keep coming back to with a big grin on my face is Simple Choices. A great tautology, if ever there was one. And again, I love the way you have a little wicked satirical aside that doesn't sort of hit you in the chin. But for example, who has given you this day your daily dread? After years of saying the Lord's Prayer, it's very nice to read something apart from daily bread. But I love that, and the way you cheekily suggest that death is safer than life.
Yeah, well,
So I love the way you play with expectations and overturn cliches, and use, as you did in the Villanelle, the lovely ability of rhyme to capture and pin down things and circle around them and return. So all I wanted to say is that I'm going to enjoy reading this collection for a long time.
oh, Trish, thank you.
I kept coming back to the poem, The Ceiling, and I just love the rhyme structure in that, and it just, I keep coming back and going, oh, that's a nice surprise, and it's funny, isn't it? The poems that really yell at you.
Yeah.
Well, I love being sort of obsessed with death since I was a child. I really like the poem, Robyn, on the conversation with death.
Oh, that one.
And
Yeah, the old woman is talking to death. I know. I know.
yeah, it's brilliant because you know, it's just such a different take on the whole thing, and that death
Don't
may.
give it away.
Sorry?
Don't give the surprise away.
Okay, are you going to read?
Yeah.
Are you going to read it?
No, it's too long, I think, to read
Oh,
for.
I can't talk about it then. Okay, all right, I won't. I just
But
it's really clever and
thank you.
and original, you know, really original. So
Oh.
okay, well, I won't give it away, but people should buy the book
Uh-huh.
to read the dialogue. That's what you want, isn't it? They should buy the book to read the dialogue.
To read the dialogue with death. There's a seller.
Yep. Well, actually, that's a great line. That's a great line. Read this book. Read this book.
You get to talk with death.
Talk
And
with death. Yeah, yeah. And death is really interesting. Has a
yeah,
very interesting take on
no,
things. Yeah.
no slouch death. You know, it's just death after all. I mean, the late great Ursula Le Guin, who I loved dearly and who was my elder. We used to have long conversations about writing, and she was a brilliant writer. And she at one point she said, "Oh, I'm now old, this young old and old." I'm old because she was like 87 or 89. And she said, and all I do is I just slough from room to room like an old hound dog. And I said, well, you know, she said, but people act as if there's something to be afraid of. And I said then to her, well, it's just death after all. And she said, and she burst out laughing, and we both laughed for about a full 2 or 3 minutes until I realized that what we were laughing at was that it was saying it was just death after death. So I mean, there was great laughter.
Well, I was thinking this morning, reflecting too on the new old woman and the old new woman, and it was going around my head. Sorry?
In Dark Matter.
Yeah, just the concept of, you know, and well, you're thinking of yourself as age. My father would say, "Oh, just a girl," you know, because he died at 102 last year. So, wow. So I'm sorry, you have a long way to go yet.
Yeah, I'm only 82.
That's right, you're a baby, just a girl. So, but I was thinking about what you're creating in some ways is, you know, the new woman was created, you know, at the turn of the century. So this was an original new change that women were riding bicycles, for God's sake, you know. I mean, that was big, you know. And so now it's like, well, what are we going to be looking like when we're older and old? What are we, the radical feminists, the women who put so much into it, the poets? Here it is. Here you're giving it to us. You're giving it to us. So vital, so full of creativity, you know, so energetic in your work. I mean, really, it's just, I'm awed totally, you know, and I kick myself in the butt. So get moving.
And Sandy Jeff's another poet and Spinifex author writes in the chat, I'm going to read the book. I can't read the first part of the message and read the poems. I'm convinced, she says.
Excellent.
I'm convinced.
Listen, I have
to reading about death.
I have to say a word about Spinifex, Susan, because this is not a standard author praising publisher. I've been published by a lot of houses. And I love Spinifex. I mean, I love the work that you and Renata have been doing for now. How many years? 30?
32.
Something? 32.
32.
Consistently. And I know because I've been an editor at a publishing house and I've been an editor at magazines and I've worked in the industry for most of my working life. I know how hard that is. I know how very daily hard that is. A bloody piece of work. It's hard raising money. It's hard doing the work. It's hard dealing with authors because we're not always, oh my God. It's hard dealing with readers. The whole thing is hard. It's as joyous because you know that the work that you're publishing is quality work. But I want to thank you, because everybody at the house is a real quality act. And that goes for you, Rachel, and that goes for everybody else who is silently on board at this moment. Is my real deep gratitude, because there's excellence in every step of the process. And particularly as a poet, there's a way in which poems being set, is special. And it's not just, prose, it's not just justified lines, etc. So I'm just so grateful to you. And I'm so grateful that these two books, which are so far my magnum opus, are with Spinifex. So thank you, Susan Hawthorne, and thank you, darling Renata, for all that you do all the time, every day. I'm very, very grateful. And the poems are grateful. I mean, these poems are, they have a tenacity and an affirmation that I didn't expect.
Okay.
I really didn't. I somehow thought, well, I mean, they're grim, but I was reading the other day that Gabriela Mistral had written a whole series of things called the Death Sonnets. And I thought, oh, well, and she was a Nobelist. So if you can write a whole series of things called the Death Sonnets, that might be something. But the truth is that there's an affirmation here that I had not anticipated, and that I don't deny. And yet it doesn't change the underlying river, as I refer to it in, I think, Necropolitans, that continually pulses toward the omnivorous sea. But that's all right. And there's even a kind of insouciance to it. So, and politically, we're doing the best we can in all these countries, all of us women. And if we can't triumph, if it turns out it is too late and the planet has just said we've had it, then at the very least, this is the way to go, fighting. And at least it's a real bonny way to exit. But frankly, I think we're not just going to exit. I think we might just pull it off, and it's women who would do that.
Yep, we will. All right, Renata, your turn.
Oh, is it my turn? Okay, well, what should I say? Well, first of all, I really want to thank Robyn, of course, for her beautiful book. And I remember reading it, the manuscript, for the first time, and it was just, not being a poet myself, it really, really moved me tremendously. And so thank you very, very much. And also for your words today. And my second thanks goes, of course, to my long-term friend and sister in arms, Robyn Rowland, whose words are also really wonderful. And I have to say, the two Robyn's books, and Adrian Rich's, and Susan Hawthorne's, and Sykes sometimes, are amongst the poetry books that I actually understand, because some poetry goes above my head, I have to say. But your books are really a treasure trove as well, and your words are a treasure trove. And so thank you very much, Robyn Rowland, too. And of course, Trish. I do remember one embarrassing moment. I don't know if you remember that, Trish, when Jan Fook and I said we would accept your first poem, but not the second, for our anthology on dogs. And you wrote back to us and said they were the same poem. We were really, really very, very embarrassed.
That's good.
So of course the whole poem went in, and you can still read it in The Girl's Best Friend, our wonderful, wonderful book on women and dogs. But now to the other thank yous, and thank you very much, Robyn Morgan, for mentioning the members of the Spinifex team. And we are very, very grateful to everybody, because, as I say every time, books don't just
drop from heaven. They have to be made. And even with such an accomplished writer as Robyn Morgan and Robyn Rowland and Trish Sykes, I mean, there's always things that you want to change or whatever. So I thank above all Susan Hawthorne, who is guiding all of us with her sure hand, especially when it comes to poetry and fiction. Then also Rachel McDermott, and note if you ever write to her, it's Rachel R-A-E. Otherwise, you have to pay
A-E-E.
A-E.
Otherwise, it's a $1
Anyway,
donation
Rachel, who
to
is our
charity.
No, I know. Oh, you quite a few, I think. Anyway, it all goes to Dashi, her dog, which is a very good cause. So Rachel, who's our publicity manager and is a really big whiz with newsletters and anything to do with Google Drive, which I shall say no more. So thank you very much, Rachel, and I'm glad you're now living amongst many beautiful flowers. The other woman I really want to thank very much, who can't be here today because she's working in the bookshop on Wednesday, is Pauline Hopkins, our senior editor, and who on this book, together with Susan and of course Robyn Morgan, really worked on the editing of some of the poems. So and Pauline works on all our books with us, because we always edit, the three of us, Pauline, Susan, and me. And that works extremely well. Then Danielle Osborne, our office manager, who does all the things that we don't want to do or we can't do, and keeps us basically on a straight line. Well, no, not a straight line. Like Robyn,
a straight line.
Going back and forth line, but she does keep us there. So thank you very much for all your work. Danielle, and Caitlin, who was here before us, she's gone. Well, she's still there, and who is our social media manager and spreads our stuff on Instagram and Facebook and X. You see how up to date I am. So, and then I also really want to mention, and Robyn, you mentioned it already before, the beautiful interiors of the book. They have been really carefully and with love created by Helen Christie, who is our typesetter for all our books, and she really spends with every new book. She goes into it, and does her best. And thank you very much, Helen. And similarly, the cover with Robyn's beautiful photo, but also the back cover, which is very, very nice. And that's Step Snipson, who also is just beyond, like I email her something on a Sunday evening saying, help, please. If you read your email, I don't expect you to read your email. It's Sunday, but if you do, thank you. And sure enough, he comes back within half an hour. So we are very, very gifted and very blessed, to have all these women working with us. And I think
a woman, Alice Teeple, did the photograph on the front.
Oh yes,
right. Yeah,
Beautiful.
the photograph is
And
very,
the
very
photograph
beautiful
inside as well. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's
So
beautiful.
Blake, Robyn's son, is about the only man that we sort of like have in this huge array of women.
That's right. He's choking.
She's okay,
But he came up. But Renata, he came up. I thought, I was so delighted. I thought my toes would curl with delight. He came up with the 3-part names for the book: reaping, threshing, and winnowing. He looked up the processes of what you do as you bring in the sheaves. We already knew what the title was, and we wanted to explain that further. And so he came across them and he said, oh, wait till you hear this. And I listened and I thought, uh-oh, that's it. Oh my God, it was a match,
Very good. Well, he's his mother's son. That's all I can say, You know where that comes from. It's kind of up here.
I'm just going to insert that Karen Higgs is here, and she was one of the 3 women in Melbourne who produced Monster back in 1970.
Oh my God, you amazing woman. And it was a wonderful,
tiny little book that fitted into your pocket.
I
And,
know, I know.
what-
I have one. I have one of the pirated editions.
Yeah.
Australia had one, Oz had one, New Zealand had one. There it is. And of course the Brits themselves, and Canada had one, and the English had one. Which was even more courageous than anybody else, because there's very strong punitive measures. So we have a long history. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I think that must have been quite a terrifying time, Robyn, to be threatened with being sued and be sued by Ted Hughes. I mean, was that scary?
Yeah, it was pretty scary. But even more so for the women who put forth in the Commonwealth pirated editions, because they did so with my permission. But nonetheless, these were pirated editions, and there were prison terms for some of them, because it was there's a copy. It was considered slander, and for that there was accusation, trial, sentence, and they did it anyway. I mean,
Fabulous.
in 1972, they did it anyway.
Karen,
Well,
if you would like, Karen, if you would like to unmute and say something, because I can see your lips moving. But you have to unmute. Unmute down on the lower left.
There we
corner.
go.
There we are.
So just to say, Robyn, it's wonderful to see you like this. It's just fabulous, and I'm really delighted.
Well, we're still going strong, you and I.
We are. I think we're about the same
You know what?
age.
Ted Hughes is gone.
What's that?
Ted Hughes is gone.
Oh, well, thank God for that.
Yeah.
Oh, goddess. Ted Hughes is gone. Well, yes. Well, we never needed him, did we, really?
No. Oh, no, but you did the real work. I mean, it was amazing. When I first had news of those pirated editions, I burst into tears, and they said they want permission. It's very unusual for people to ask permission to do a pirated edition of a book. I said, oh, they've got it. They've got oh yeah.
So we knew it was you we needed to consult, not the publisher.
You were so right, because the publisher, of course, said no, but it was me, and I said yes, and the book came out.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and we were so pleased, Diane Bell and I were so pleased to start Radically Speaking with an excerpt from Monster. It still chills my veins when I read it. It's just so good. Yeah, we need this today because, as you know, we're on the straight again. But, we will prevail. Stupidity has never won the day, I think. So in the end, it might still take a little bit of time. But we will prevail, I'm sure.
I like that.
I think it's so easy to underestimate how much has been achieved, just in our lifespans. I mean, reading that poem, Robyn, about, reading what you said, in the interview about language change and, the whole area of domestic violence, the fact that, there were no rape crisis centres, there were no idea that you could go somewhere safe. All of that, they're massive social changes, and we just underestimate it because we look to the next thing and think, but we need to fix this or we need to fix that. But I mean, I think Renata and I talked so often in the past about the work we did in resistance to reproductive and genetic engineering, and really, I kept saying to her, but it's like we're in a social movement, so it's not like we're going to see it in our individual lifetimes, everything fixed.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we rely on those that come after us, and the
movement is slow, but
slow.
The slowness is a barometer of its depth. Because if it's fast and superficial, it can be undone. But when it really seeps down into and through the grass, as it were, through the roots, then you've got permanent change, and that's what we're after. And the young people in this country, and I think all over the world, are amazing and a very different animal already, in terms of every feminist issue and beyond that. And they see all the linkages as well with sexism, with racism, with class, with, I mean, they don't see these as disparate, separate things. So I think that's very hopeful, and onward.
Onward.
So now you can actually see how to order Robyn's books. And if you are in Australia, or if you're going to the Spinifex Press website, you can actually buy both books at a special discount. And if you're in Australia, there's free post. I'm afraid we can't subsidise post overseas because it's ridiculously expensive, and then we would get exactly zero. It may be even minus. So sorry, we can't subsidise your postage, but that's life.
I would not worry about that. I think we can manage that part. So.
And of course, you can also order them overseas. In the US, we have a great distributor also in the UK. So please run out and buy as many copies of Robyn's books as you can.
Yeah, and there's Christmas coming. That's a good Christmas present. Although we will have another Christmas present. Basuniti Namjoshi will publishing a wonderful satirical whatever you call it, fable called The Good-Hearted Gardener. So that will be a Christmas present too, but better about 2 or 3.
And Suniti's on the call too.
And it's not only Christmas, it's Hanukkah, it's Kwanzaa, it's Diwali coming up soon. I mean, it's the festival of the returning of the light. So there's always that.
If you're in the north.
And also what we know about women's friendships is we just gift people things. We don't need a special occasion.
That's
Very true.
Yeah.
They're the best ones, out of the blue. I love that.
Oh, you are so special and very dear. And all the Spinifex women are treasures. I've loved working on these 3 books with you. I've just enjoyed
Thank
it.
you. We love to you.
The third book that Robyn is referring to is Parallax, which is her novel, which is truly fantastic. But so we probably need to start winding up, even though we could sit here and talk for hours and hours and hours. But I think we'll turn the recording off now.